let's start with Metallica's "And Justice for All." So this album comes out in 1988.
Yes.
I have so much to say about this album, but let's get started with, do you remember the first time that you heard this album?
Yes. Sorry, man. Sorry, dude. One second.
I get sad as well sometimes, you know.
Put it down, please. I apologize. I'm trying my best here.
You're doing good, man. You're multitasking. I'm not capable of multitasking, so.
Cool. Okay, so yes, And Justice for All, that's the first heavy metal record that came into my life as a up and coming drummer. Like when I'll talk about some of the other records before we mention, but And Justice for All was the first record that I tried to, as a drummer, sit down, and I was just completely in awe of what was going on the drums. And I mean, I sat and learned every single note of every song on that album. It was the first heavy metal band it was the first, say hi. I was about his age probably when And Justice for All came out. So yeah, it was one of the highlights of that record was, of course, their song One, you know, the big Metallica song One.
Big breakthrough with the music video that pushed it through to MTV, right?
Yeah, which was their first video they ever did. I think, you know, the double bass part on One, landmark has taken my life. That was the first time I'd ever considered double bass drum or any of that stuff. And it's funny because by today's standards, it's kind of slow, but I still can't play. I'm not a double bass guy. So to play that solidly and successfully now, I still can't say I have that down. But just the drumming on that album, to me, is the most iconic heavy metal drum performance, you know, of them all for me. And it, you know, when you listen back to that record now it's known, and Justice for All doesn't have a very good bass mix.
There's virtually no bass in the mix. I just listened to it, and the bass is virtually non-existent on that mix. It's crazy.
There's no bass, yeah. So I don't know if because of that I got to tune in more to what what Lars was playing back then, but it was everything about that album, man. It was the first time I saw like long-haired guys banging their head, a drummer with a big drum set, just all of it, you know. The whole heavy metal package for me was And Justice for All, and it was really right as I was becoming trying to find my way as a drummer, and I was sort of becoming a metal fan, and that came out right at the right time. But yeah, everything to those like long minute And Justice for All songs, it's like, I don't know, like 7 minutes or something, and those long-winded, you know, musical parts through its, you know, Harvester of Sorrow, or man, I've got to think of all the songs. I could name them all right now.
Eye of the Beholder, Dire something.
Dire's Eve, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would listen to that album from start to finish back then, and just I would pay attention to every single note played on the drums and relearn it. So it was just such a big deal to me as a kid, you know, to understand. Like I was talking before about that relationship between bass player and the bass drum and the bass player. This record wasn't so much that for me. It was more about the relationship between a drummer and his role in the band, and what you could kind of do, kind of how much you could do and get away with, where it would still make sense. Roman, come here. Come here. Man, oh man. Now I got a kid climbing on the table. I tell you what, podcasts for me at 46 years old are a lot different than they used to be.
Oh, it's all good. That's all good. That And Justice for All was that was an important transition album, because you had the unfortunate death of Cliff Burton after Master of Puppets, and this is where Jason Newsted came in. So new bass player on this album, leading to the Black Album afterwards.
Right.
So it's it's a transition, and then it's like heartbreaking that he comes in, and then they decide it's basically um, James and Lars that decide that in the mix they want the bass lower and lower and lower. So Jason comes in, and his first album they basically muted him, and it makes sense later on why he ends up leaving Metallica. Like that, that's a tough spot to be.
Yeah, I know. And there you can hear now. I'm not sure how they do this online, but there's like those. Come here. There's these versions online of like with the bass up. I'm not sure if it's a real thing, but man, that album would have sounded so incredible with the bass up. But still, I mean, that's how I know that record as it sounds. It's still magical to me because it's all about the drums and guitar on that, So yeah, to me, I love the sound of that record. I'm not a bass player, but when I do listen back with that bass up on YouTube, it's like, man, that's, what were they thinking? But it's such an iconic record. I think because of how it sounds, it's what stands out.
Yeah, there's all these comments in the years since then about the bass not being audible in the mix, and I have a quote here from the producer. So the producer of the album said in 2018, so like way later, he said, "I'm probably one of the only people in the world, including Jason, the bassist, and Toby Wright, the assistant engineer, who heard the bass tracks on And Justice for All. And I have to say, they're freaking brilliant." So it sounds like he had like incredible bass playing, and it was James, in James's defense of the mix, he felt that Jason was mostly just playing what the guitars were doing, and he felt that he couldn't hear the difference between the guitars and the bass, so he kept shaving off the bass for the guitars to pierce through. That's his defense of why the mix is the way it is. But it's definitely a strange sounding album with the bass.
It is. It's unusual. It's very high-endy and like clicky, but I mean, it when it comes on. I don't know. I think it's an amazing sounding record. I don't know. Of course, I just grew up to it, so I don't know. It's killer to me. For me, definitely the most important Metallica record in my life.
Do you remember the Grammy controversy at all around that album? Do you remember this?
Oh, is it Jethro Tull thing?
Yeah. Yeah, so 1989, Metallica and these other bands are getting so popular, they're pushing metal to the mainstream, just like hip hop was underground and eventually goes mainstream by the help of one of your top 5 albums of all time with Run DMC. So in 1989, the Grammys finally clue into this, and for the first time ever, they add a like best metal performance. And Metallica is hot off of And Justice for All. Even though they're like underground, they're selling out arenas. One breaks through on MTV with the music video. They sell like 8 million copies, even though they're underground. They're one of the best-selling artists in the world. They're a shoe-in for it's almost like they were so undeniable with what they were doing that the Grammys made a category that obviously Metallica was going to be the inaugural winners. And then Jethro Tull wins, and they're not even considered metal or hard rock. They were just kind of rock. They have like flutes and stuff, like instruments that are like embarrassing to play in a rock or metal band, and they win. And it's considered one of the biggest Grammy snubs of all time. And what's kind of cool for Metallica is the success of that album continued into the next year. So at the Grammys the year after, Metallica won their very first Grammy. And when Lars got up to accept the award, what he said was, "I'd like to thank Jethro Tull for not putting out an album this year," which was pretty awesome. So I remember that controversy. It's still like one of the biggest things in music lore when it comes to metal.
I do remember all that. Yeah. I mean, God, Jethro Tull, so amazing. But yeah, to be in the same category as Metallica didn't make a ton of sense. Roman, I'm sorry. Roman, come here.
That's all good. I discovered something pretty shocking. So they had Fleming Rasmussen, hopefully I'm saying the name correctly. So he had produced Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. And he ended up eventually producing And Justice for All. But apparently at the start of the recording, he wasn't available. So it was actually the producer, so Mike Klink, who did Appetite for Destruction for Guns N' Roses, he's actually the one that started the recording of And Justice for All. And they got him just because their other dude wasn't available. So this Mike Klink, he started the recording of that album, and then eventually Fleming became available, and they literally just kicked out the guy that had started the album. So the album And Justice for All was almost produced by the same producer as Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction, which is wild.
And very interesting you say that. Mike Klink, a good friend of mine, Les Stroud from Canada, from the TV show Survivor Man, is a good pal of mine. And actually Mike Klink just produced his record. So he went up to Muskoka. Where the heck does Les live? Anyway, yeah, Mike was up in Canada recently doing Les Stroud's record. So yeah, he's out there supporting the Canadian Survivor Man.
So Master of Puppets is Metallica's most acclaimed album, and the Black Album is their best-selling and I would say most popular album as far as sales go, and in the general population. So I wanted to do this deep dive with you about this album to know, despite one being another album being more acclaimed, another one being more well-known and better selling, I wanted to know why this album specifically is the one in your top 5. And it's cool to hear that it had such a big impact on you as a youngster getting into drumming.
Yeah, it's all about the drumming. As a young drummer, to me, And Justice for All, it was learning every single note on that record, verbatim. And of course, yeah, and still to this day, that's why I mention it. It's still just, when I think of Metallica, I think of And Justice and Master of Puppets. I mean, all of those records before, but just for me, where I was in my life, particularly at that time, that was the heaviest shit and the most complicated, drum wise stuff that I'd ever heard. And it was, like I said, the first introduction to the double bass, in particular, that one thing, that still is the coolest thing ever. And still something I cannot play properly. I don't know if there, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if this is on purpose, but the part you're describing, that part. So the song in the music video, they're about like the horrors of war, and to me that part sounds like gunfire. It sounds like and when you see them live, that song, it's crazy, man. So I've seen them in Ottawa with Godsmack opening like 18 years ago. I saw them in Toronto. I have tickets for the upcoming 2-night concert with Pantera, who some of the members, and with a Five Finger Death Punch. So I'm excited for that. But when I saw them in Ottawa, their setup, they were playing that song. And as it got to that part that we're talking about, suddenly the lights are going weird and the stage, there's smoke, and the whole stage collapses into rubble. Like, this is the craziest technology. So they're playing, and then suddenly the guitar cuts out, and then a light like blows out, and then there's smoke, and then the stage collapses, and you're like, oh my God, like what's going on? Is this a tragedy? What's happening? And then out of the rubble, members start coming out with the and it's like they recreated being in war and coming out of the trenches, and again, where that to me sounds like guns in war. It's so wild, man, what people can do beyond just the music,
Yeah, I remember. I'm not sure if it's the same tour that you're talking about, but they used to have this like pratfall thing every night, where I think we're talking about the same thing. The lighting fixture started falling down. A guy like caught on fire, came running out, one of their crew guys, and they sort of staged this like disaster every night that happened and tried to like make it off like it was happening in real time. So I think that's the same thing. I don't remember the band guys coming out, but it's just amazing. The Metallica machine, that they're able to put on those performances, the memorable performances that you're talking about, man. I've seen Metallica so many times over the years as well. And I'll be going to see them this summer as well, with some of my buddies are opening up for them. So yeah, they just don't stop, man. They're amazing. And their new song, I don't know. When I hear new Metallica songs, like I love Metallica so much. They're such a part of my DNA. But I'm just like, I just love the old stuff. You know, I'm always supporting them. I'm always wanting more stuff to come. But I think it's called Lux Eterna is their new song. It's like, it's cool, man. I'm just
It's a throwback to more of the thrash sound than the rock
yeah,
sound, you know?
yeah.
Are
Whatever
you
it is.
excited for the new album, or you don't care too much anymore?
No, I mean, I always care. I always care for Metallica. I could never say I don't care. It'd be so disrespectful.
You
know,
want to
from-
hear what's coming, like just to be able to put on headphones and dive into like another, you know, hour of new creations from this all-time great band. That's always exciting. I have a confession. I
Sure.
even like what are considered to be Metallica's worst albums. Like, you know,
which is what
you know, like Load and Reload or Saint Anger, or those ones. Like, you know, Metallica, because they've released, you know, 2, 3, 4 all-time great metal albums, it's like there's this pinnacle that's hard to recreate. And I remember seeing a Lars comment where he said, you know, even our worst albums, he thinks are at least like a certain point. Like he says, you know, I forget what the quote is, but essentially, if any other band, like if I started a metal band today and our band put out the worst Metallica album, we'd be like so proud of that album, you know, and we'd probably have hit singles with it, and it would be great. So anyways, a confession that I like even what's considered the worst Metallica albums. I like almost every song on them, to be honest. You know, sometimes the production choices are a little strange and the mixing's a little strange, but yeah.
Anger record will always be you know, it'll always be what it is. But I think
the garbage can snare, that must be hard as a drummer to hear that.
I think Death Magnetic, that record they did with Rick Rubin, every song on that album, it sounds like Rick listened to this song and like, okay, this song needs to be the Creeping Death song of the record. And then this needs to be the Harvester of Sorrow song on this record. And this song, you can literally hear every track on there as like a paying homage to an old song, which I don't know. It's interesting. They did it so well. Rick Rubin delivered it so well. I love that album, man. To me, if you put on Death Magnetic, it's like all of Metallica's career up till then in one record. But Saint Anger, man, gosh, I try. I can't. I
like Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Like I'm just like a big Metallica fan.
I like the tick 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 tock. There's something, you know, there's a hook there, but I don't know.
Saint Anger and Some Kind of Monster. Yeah, they had 3 singles on that one. I have just 2 questions left about the Metallica album. These are the 2 hardest Metallica questions that can be asked. Are you ready for these? These are tough.
Sure am.
Is it, when you look at the entire discography for Metallica, is Lars overrated or underrated as a drummer?
He's right where he belongs. He's right where he should be, man. He's an integral part of the band. I don't know what overrated or I mean, I guess I know what underrated is, but he's gotten a lot of slack over the years. I'll tell you this, in my opinion, Lars's drum parts over the years have been the most important part of my musical growth and development, learning how to play those parts from day one, you know. So, you know, like judging Metallica now, like or Lars as a drummer now in his 60s, I'm so happy that he's there still keeping that massive machine moving, and he goes on stage and he plays those songs. We're so used to guys now that are, you know, the level of drumming or like the level of skateboarding or the level of everything has gone up so much that I mean, when I was a kid, if you could do a kickflip on a skateboard, you know, that was insane. But now it's the same thing with drummers, you know. It's like, so I have to respect and love. Sorry, kid falling. You okay? I gotta love what Lars has brought to the table throughout the last 30, 40 years as a drummer. And just not as a drummer, but as a businessman. He's made Metallica a monster machine. You know, he's created that band. He's turned that band into this colossal business. So there's just more to it than just Lars the drummer. But if I'm just talking about as Lars the drummer, he's so crucial to me in my development that I don't need to judge him right now in his 60s as a drummer. I just need to think of him as the guy that I grew up with. I mean, if I'm at that age and I'm still selling out stadiums, I'm Lars, I mean, God bless him. He's kicking ass in my opinion, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter if he's what everyone says about him online. I have full love and respect for him.
Yeah, I guess the question stems from me hearing both sides of that, where I've heard drummers that say when they were growing up and they were listening to the Black Album, before they became drummers, they heard those albums and they had Lars up there on a pedestal as like the greatest drummer of all time. And then as they themselves became great and proficient drummers, they realized that, oh, his drumming isn't that complicated. So I've heard one side of it, but then I think, you're not muted. No, you're good. And then oh, it's all good. And then the other side of it is, you know, sometimes you hear that he's actually underrated, where his drum parts are so unique and so memorable, and they're just very original and strange and different. And like, you can't picture other drummers being able to come up with the drum parts that he has. So I hear both sides of it being overrated and underrated. So I just wanted your opinion on it. And I think, you know, the drum parts that he's laid down to tape over the years, some of them are undeniably, you know, epic.
They are, man. You gotta, it's so easy for people to jump on, you know, on musicians as they get older and age. But yeah, he's one of the most crucial, or if not the most crucial, heavy metal drummer of all time. And he's taken that genre for all of the bands to come after him into such a huge, I mean, the fact they can still sell out stadiums and stuff, and I got nothing but respect. And that album forever, I mean, I can still put it on and try to drum to it. And it's like, it's so challenging, you know. I hope one day I got a chance to meet them. I've not met anybody in Metallica. I hope I do one day. And I hope I get to tell them that, you know, face to face one day.
Awesome. So final difficult Metallica question. Before that, can you flip the camera landscape again? And just because it makes for there we go. We got the full widescreen mode. Final question. This one's tough. Was Bob Rock good or bad for Metallica? Tough question. So without Bob Rock, you don't have the Black Album, which brings metal to the mainstream and brings Metallica to the biggest band in the world. But then you have albums that, you know, the people that love the first 3 or 4 Metallica albums think that Bob Rock, because of after the Black Album, they think that Bob Rock was the worst thing that happened to Metallica. Where do you stand on Bob Rock?
No, I think Bob Rock was, I mean, the Black Album is Metallica's obviously their biggest record today. I think, I wish he would have done the last few again. I kind of wish that Metallica would have went back to the original, the guy that you mentioned his name from Injustice for All, the Swedish guy.
Rasmussen, yeah.
It would be cool to hear him and Bob Rock and Rick Rubin all together.
That would be cool.
The next record. Yeah, I think Bob Rock, you know, completely took Metallica into another level. I mean, that album sounds so fucking incredible. Every
Dude,
song,
Sad But True, the drums on Sad But True are such monster. Yeah.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's funny because as I know that Our Lady Peace guys, other bands that have gone and worked with Bob Rock over the years, it's like with Finger 11, actually, I always brought his name up as far as, you know, who might want to produce our next record. And the guys were never really interested in pursuing that direction. But man, I think Bob's amazing. The sound, his contribution to songs, you know, like with Our Lady Peace, there's the Arnold Lanny Our Lady Peace records that are those records, and then there's the Bob Rock Our Lady Peace records. Just like with Metallica, there's the, you know, each definitive producer they work with at the time. But yeah, I got nothing but great things to say about Bob Rock. I think he's really a huge part of that band, and I bet you he'll come back to them at some point. It'd be cool. Wouldn't it be cool to hear like a new Metallica record with him?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's amazing about Bob Rock and his confidence in what he does as a producer, so when Metallica was at the peak, well, before the Black Album, when they were at the peak of And Justice for All, they had sold millions of albums, they're selling out arenas. Bob Rock goes up to them and says, hey, despite all that success, I still don't think you've captured the essence of Metallica on record yet. And they had already done some of the greatest albums of all time with Master of Puppets and, you know, Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All and all that. So that's what they said to that's what he said to Metallica. And at first they were taken aback, like, who's this guy? Like, how dare he? And eventually they came around to it thinking like, we need to put our egos aside, and maybe he is right. And that's what led to them working with him on the Black Album. So it's wild to think he went up to Metallica and said that. So
yeah, to have the balls to, I mean, that's what makes a great producer, to go up to these guys, and sometimes the things that they don't want to hear, I think, is what makes a great producer. And I mean, still, man, that album sonically sounds so fucking badass, you know. And I know that Load and Reload were done with him as well, and I don't know if I've ever actually listened through those full records, but songs like Of Wolf and Man and what, Into the Never, is it called? Into the Never, I think. There's so many songs on the Black Album that you kind of forget about, that are, Of Wolf and Man really stands out to me. It's such badass songs, man. I mean, that thing is,
dude, there was Nothing Else Matters, Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam. Like, there was 5 massive hit singles. Holier Than Thou. Holier Than Thou was actually supposed to be the first single, not Enter Sandman. And because they wanted to keep that like super heavy thrash metal going, and then someone knew that the actual mainstream breakthrough would be Enter Sandman. So they, you know, with the ego and not wanting to you know, the sellout or whatever, they were against it, and they ended up going with Enter Sandman. And to this day, the Black Album is the best-selling album in US history on SoundScan. So since SoundScan started in 1991, no album has sold more in the US than the Black Album, even up to today. That's how big that album was.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's got to be over 100 million now, right? I'm sure. Something like
that. No, I don't think there's any album that sold 100 million. So the best-selling album of all time switches between Michael Jackson Thriller and between the Eagles Greatest Hits. They're both around 60 million, like globally, and they switch because they're so close. So one year, you know, one will jump the other, but that's about 60 million. So I think the Black Album is probably about 25 million globally, but in the US it sold well over 16 million since 1991, which is wild. There were years, man, since like the downloading and the iTunes and the Napster years, the best-selling album of the year would be like 2.3 million. Like, just to show how crazy 16 point whatever million albums. That's, if you were in Canada, that's every second person you meet in Canada has Metallica the Black Album, to show how many, you know, 16 million albums is. It's wild.
You know, I've recently, in the last couple of years, Joe from the Eagles is you know, we become acquaintances. Joe Walsh? Yeah.
Joe Walsh? Yeah.
So this is a sort of random side story, but
I did mention the Eagles, so I brought it on myself. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, so Joe was saying a few months ago, when COVID was at its peak, they were doing I think like 4 or 5 nights at Madison Square Garden. And I don't know, during conversation, Joe was saying, like, man, it's like the 3rd night. We're still in our hotel. You know, we're still getting, we don't know if tonight's going to be canceled. During that conversation, I was thinking to myself, like, he's so randomly and casually saying, we've sold out 5 or 6 nights at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, we don't know what's going on tonight. It's just like baffling, you know, like, yeah, the Eagles' success. But yeah, he's such a great dude, man. Joe's amazing.
My favorite story about the Eagles is there was a point where they weren't really doing anything anymore as a band. They weren't touring. And in an interview, one of the members got asked, like, hey, when are the Eagles going to tour again? And they said, when hell freezes over, like it's never going to happen. And then years later, they come back with the Hell Freezes Over tour, which I just think is like the most clever thing that's ever happened in rock history. So, okay, so we are an hour and a half into the interview and we got through album number 1. So this is a true deep dive with the top 5 favorite albums.